pretty quick video. I wanted to try and knock this one out since A, it's pretty topical, and B, it's a pretty good case study with regards to how information spreads online. By now, I'm sure you've all heard or seen the hideaway video by Verbalase, which has been making rounds on social media, from YouTube to Twitter to image boards, etc, etc. Though it was once a highly successful show, cartoon beatboxing has seen its viewership decline in recent months, mostly attributed to dual 6-month gaps from December 2020 to June 2021, and again from June 2021 to December 2021. During this year-long period, only 2 CBBs were produced. The large gap between episodes meant that there was a lack of audience interest, and by extension a punishment by the algorithm, which in turn started to promote the series less and less. It was recently discovered what the cause of this discrepancy was: a 3-minute long softcore AMV of his avatar being chased and bedded by Charlie Morningstar from the hit indie series Has Been Hotel. I'm actually not interested in the video itself, as I find that less interesting to talk about. If anything, that's the best part of this. Not only does it vastly expand the mimetic lexicon of the internet, but apparently the artists part of the studio who made it were paid quite the pretty penny, which of course keeps a roof over their head. While temporary humiliation can definitely sting, it can also open new avenues for creative expression. The closest historical analog for this video, in my opinion, would be Guptil89's top 10 hottest Sonic characters.
Why, it's Amy Rose, of course! Though more of a cutie than a hottie.
I'm actually more interested in examining the massive failures in basic business management and public relations upkeep that ended up causing this massive fallout, and by extension, having the Verbalase brand take a massive hit. I also want to make this video because I'm seeing a gross amount of misinformation and assumptions that I think will end up being massively harmful if they're allowed to continue with no oversight. While I can't stop anything, I can at least play my part in fighting misinfo while setting the record straight. The first question we need to ask is, why does this video exist in the first place? And in order to answer that question, we need to answer another one first. How did CBB get big in the first place? The appeal of CBB was always threefold. The immediate appeal was that children found the idea of seeing their favorite cartoon characters duke it out fun. Unlike syndicated media, which is governed by the acquisition of licenses, fair use allows for more transformative works, thus lots more flexibility regarding intellectual properties. Though one could argue that this has the same amount of depth as a Spider-Man Elsa video. It's no different than seeing something like Death Battle. There's something genuinely exciting for kids seeing their favorite characters duke it out, historical rivalries realized. Verbalase, the children, they yearn for Thanos versus Oompa Loompa. The children, they yearn for Pikachu versus Donkey from Shrek. Then there was the ironic appeal. CBB was a rich mimetic vein to mine. There is something deeply amusing about watching famous pop culture icons duke it out in a beatboxing competition. Beatboxing, which is a largely outdated medium. And lastly, there was an element of sincerity. People ultimately liked CBB because they enjoyed Verbalase as a person. We found his talent impressive and his sincerity endearing. There's a genuine appeal in watching people follow their passions. In many ways, you could argue that CBB was basically built for the culture of the internet. People took to it like honey. We also need to start asking a few other questions. For one, why do YouTubers diversify their content in the first place? There's a reason the term starving artist exists. Entertainment is a fickle medium, and you are often at the mercy of the platform and the taste of the time. Verbalase is a beatboxer, a practitioner of an ancient art that went out of style in the long bygone era of the 1990s. Artists diversify their portfolios as a means to gain new revenue sources. Artists wanting to branch out into the NSFW space isn't a new thing. Corey Spaz Kid, Maddie Burrito, Shenpai. A lot of YouTubers have their toes in both SFW and NSFW. At the end of the day, money is money. Art isn't stable, but human sexuality is a constant. The reason why people turn to NSFW isn't just because they have a passion for drawing anatomy, but because it's also a fairly lucrative source of income. And it's a perfectly normal thing to want to take part in. I'm sure there are artists you follow on Twitter, and I'm sure there is a good chunk of them who maintain 2 accounts, an SFW and an NSFW one. I also don't think people are correct to frame the Hideaway music video as a goon sesh. As someone who not only has been a part of the NSFW art community, but also has done his education in psychology and medicine, none of these behaviors are consistent with a goon sesh. I'm glad that the Wonder Bread guy commented, since he's actually a great study of the behavior and patterns exhibited by gooners. A real modern day Phineas Gage. I've been trying to get him entered into the DSM-5 for years, but nothing works. Typically, people who are gooners don't just get one piece, they usually commission loads of pieces, and often with the same or similar subject matter. Over the course of a decade, Wonder Bread Guy has commissioned his fetish hundreds of times. I think it tells you something about the paraphilia itself. There's a constant need for consumption, a hunger that needs to be fed. For gooners, quantity takes precedent over quality. NSFW commissions are a unique paraphilia. The fetish is specifically seeing their fantasies realized in illustrated form. It would make more sense for them to maximize their fetish by commissioning loads of the same subject matter. Variety is the spice of life, I suppose. Keeping these all in mind, I think we can deduce Verbalase's motivations for making this video. There's a specific line that Verbalase actually uses in one of his leaked comments, which I think reveals a lot about his motivations. There's a pic going around from his Discord talking about how he thought the original music video was too risque. It's important to note that the video was still softcore. Softcore NSFW, by its very nature, is meant to tease the audience. We can glean from this that it shows that he fully intended this to be seen and accessible for a wider audience. All of the aforementioned points, in my opinion, explain what his motivation for the music video actually might have been. Verbalase was trying to start a new line of softcore music videos starring his OC and popular cartoon characters. He wanted to create this as an alternative to the music videos he deemed to be too inappropriate. Much like how CBB ended up being a runaway success, he put this on a separate channel altogether, expecting this new endeavor to go exactly like his main channel. And when it underperformed because people thought it was kinda cringy, he silently enlisted it and chalked it up as a failed endeavor. There are two major issues that I have with the way Verbalase went about making this. The first class of these issues would fall under the umbrella of basic business management and risk assessment failure. The first of these would be the failure to properly test markets. Circling back to YouTubers who make NSFW content, many of these artists had made sure to test the waters ahead of time to make sure that it was worth their time. There's a reason that the term marketing research exists. Money is time and time is precious. People need to know whether or not an endeavor is going to be worth their while. Most NSFW is done with the idea that people will live out their fantasies vicariously through the illustration. Ace, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm not a 40-year-old black man, so I can't imagine myself being into skim milk. I'm just saying that one of us needs an appointment with Dr. Umar, and it's not me.
I appreciate you and I love you, but you are no use to me with that white woman on your arm, brother.
Another issue I had is the fact that he exceeded his overhead without properly testing the waters first. The average cost of a CBB episode is $20 to $30K per episode. So 20 plus 30 divided by 2 is an average of $25,000 per episode. And each episode of CBB is an average of 7 minutes in length. If the video costed you $50K for 3 minutes, then you spent 100% more than your normal operating cost for half the amount of content you were regularly getting. There's also the fact that you chose to put it on YouTube. Genuinely, why on YouTube? A platform that for the last 10 years has been actively censoring risque content in order to make itself more appealing for advertisers and kids. At the time of the vid's creation, 2021, CBB was still at its epoch, making fistfuls of cash at a time. I suspect he thought he could absorb the risk by investing in a new endeavor, but that came at the risk of losing your viewership momentum. Momentum is one of the most valuable things a creator can have. It's incredibly hard to generate and is thus extremely precious. It's imperative you preserve it. When you lose it, you can potentially risk shooting down your entire venture. A 6-month window of not doing your main show drastically whittles down your audience tremendously. The second class of these failures would fall under the umbrella of public relations failures. The first obvious failure among these is that if you have a controversial opinion, keep your damn mouth shut. It's basic business sense, especially today. Legitimately, why do you think it would ever be okay to slag off against the LGBTQ in today's day and age? It's optics suicide. Literally 1/4 of all kids in high school today identify as some sexuality other than heterosexual. And when you have an audience of kids, it's just setting yourself up for failure. There's also the fact that Ace has displayed some behaviors that would be classified as behaving inappropriately in front of minors. No, it's not what you think. Ace isn't a groomer or a creeper. Thank God. Unfortunately, it's much stupider. Within the sub-umbrella of public relationship failures, there are two big issues regarding inappropriate behavior with minors. The first of these are basically innuendos. Ace has what a friend of mine liked to call a comedic styling of a good old-fashioned American pervert. Ultimately, it's harmless and it's just meant to get a rise out of people. The innuendos weren't unlike the stuff you saw from Saberspark. You know how he constantly pushes his audience's buttons, testing the limits of things being inappropriate? Ace only has one incident of this that I know of. As a joke, he took an OC of a fan of his and made a softcore pinup of their mascot as a joke to mess with them. And again, I want to stress this pinup is the softest softcore I have ever seen. It's functionally the same as Puppy Chan's art. The sexy version of a character's avatar isn't a new gag. We've seen it before. Saberspark, Shy Gal, etc. However, the key difference between the way Saberspark approaches innuendos and the way Ace approaches them is that Saber puts the onus on himself and the joke happens at his expense. When you make those jokes towards minors, you not only make them bear the brunt of a humiliating joke, you can also risk giving them unwanted, inappropriate attention and thus make them feel uncomfortable. And again, I want to say that this is just an innocent joke on Ace's part, no different than a corny dad joke. But it's showing me that Ace is too comfortable with his minor audience to be making these kinds of jokes. This is something that can obviously be fixed. The second of these sub-umbrella issues can be chalked up to general rudeness and unprofessionalism. Some comments that have come from Ace's server have been less than savory, with him displaying some incredibly rude behavior. And I should remind you, this is a 40-year-old man behaving this way to literal children. Among these rude behaviors includes talking down to a minor who was doing unpaid labor for him and condescending toward them. In addition, in a hilarious twist of irony, Ace seems to hate fan creations. Within the CBB community, there are fans who have made their own emulations of his work as a tribute to CBB. Rather than celebrate fan creations, he literally does the opposite. He makes extremely poor taste, rude remarks saying that he hates unoriginality and that he would prefer people do their own thing. He's weirdly egotistical about this. Like, bruh, you made your bread and butter based off other people's intellectual properties. You don't have a leg to stand on. It's actually believed that this is what might have inspired the leaks in the first place. There are some of your younger fans who believe that you are going out of your way to intentionally copyright strike fan-made videos and get their channels shut down. However, if you even excite one singular neuron in your brain and do a little bit of investigative work, you'd know that's not true. There are tons of videos that are reacting to Ace's work that have tons of views. It's most likely that their channels were targeted by YouTube's automatic copyright strike system. As with any big YouTuber drama, there's bound to be a lot of misinformation floating around, and I think it's worth examining why that is. Typically, misinformation spreads because of a combination of two things. First, the internet's capacity for high-speed information transmission, which encourages immediacy over truth. And secondly, a combination of psychological principles, such as the serial positioning effect and the Kuleshov effect, as well as mimetic fitness. Mimetic fitness refers to the notion that the strength of an idea directly correlates with its ability to spread. But just because something is funny or memeable or repeatable doesn't make it true. People will see 15-year-old and animation and bankruptcy and transphobia, and then without actually parsing the details, mythologize an entire story based off scraps of information. A lie travels the entire world before the truth has a chance to come out. The fact is, a YouTuber trying and failing to create a market for softcore music videos sounds a lot less funny than a guy who bankrupted himself on a 50k goon sesh. All the more concerning that a bunch of actual adult YouTubers are contributing to the misinformation. Part of the issue with commentary is that extra commentary can end up muddying waters and therefore blur intentions. There's a line that SaberSpark uses in his video that made me a little miffed.
Because we're all looking at this going, what was the point? Why did you make this? Was this just for you? Was this for viewers? What was the objective here?
He asks this question a couple times throughout the video, and it made me a little angry, not gonna lie. Saber, you're literally friends with NSFW artists. You joke about being a gooner all the time. You made a female version of yourself that will inevitably be Lyra plushy. You of all people know why people step into NSFW. It's to make money. This video only serves to muddy the water as Saber profits from it. It's 20 minutes of SaberSpark asking himself a rhetorical question he knows the answer to. The reason he's asking why did he do this is mostly an auditory Kuleshov. It's to make it seem more illogical than it actually is. This on top of the fact that you went out of your way to leak DMs feels incredibly unprofessional from you, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty disappointed, man. I like that there was another video by some kid called Adi Mohammedani or whatever. He made a video calling itself The Truth About Verbalase when it's mostly just hand-me-down information from a secondhand source. The reason I know where you got your points from is because it was the same person I contacted about Ace too, the one who made the original Twitter thread. They gave me the same talking points that you used in your video verbatim. However, when I pushed them back on their talking points, they seemed less sure of themselves, and even admitted that some of the things that they had a grudge over were not really all that serious or even well-founded. While it's important to ask for interviews, it's also important to properly vet them. When I asked about the whole censoring of fan content, I asked him whether or not the people in the fan community ever brought this up to Ace, and he said no. I also explained to him that there are tons of React videos still up, and that people have been using CBB's animations without being struck down, and that this could have been an issue with YouTube's automatic copyright censors. When I asked him if he had proof of Ace being bankrupt, he pointed out the fact that he couldn't afford animations. But of course, that wasn't what I asked. I asked if Ace ever mentioned to him that he was unable to take out a loan, to which he said he didn't know. Then I had to explain to him that bankruptcy does not mean he cannot afford new animation. Bankruptcy is a legal status in which the party in question is no longer able to pay their debts. While Ace is definitely responsible for poor decision making and general rude conduct towards fans, it doesn't give people a license to spread misinformation about him. So let's go ahead and start knocking out some of these big myths. The animator of Hideaway was 15. No. Hydra Animates, one of the animators on his server, is a minor, and an animator, but not the animator of the video. This bit of misinformation comes from a screen cap where people were doing introductions on Ace's server. The leaked DMs by SaberSpark allude to a team of animators doing this. Verbalase is bankrupt. Now, this one just takes a little bit of critical thinking, which seems pretty hard for some of you, but I'll try to help. Bankruptcy is not being unable to afford new animations. The claim comes from a literal 17-year-old who, as I mentioned before, does not understand the concept of a copyright strike, nor the concept of bankruptcy itself. You can also tell if people are bankrupt by looking up their public records, and from what I gathered, there's nothing there. Another reason the bankruptcy argument doesn't make a lot of sense is just by looking at the timeline and considering the production logistics. I was actually provided a timeline of every CBB, which I think will help give a clear picture of what actually might have killed CBB in the first place. As you can see, there was a massive gap between December 2020, June 2021, and December 2021. Before this, CBBs were coming out at a rate of 1 every 2 to 3 months, but then there was a noticeable gap in the release schedule. That gap undoubtedly was caused by Hideaway, as May 2021 preceded June of that month that year. The thing that everyone misses though is that after December 2021, he was still able to afford more animations, 5 more to be exact. Each CBB costs anywhere from 10 to 30k. So most likely he was able to spend somewhere around 50 to 150k. Continuing to be able to afford the production of multiple animations from the years 2021 to 2023, which probably costed somewhere around 200k total, is not the behavior of someone who is bankrupt. Considering that he was able to afford more animations after Hideaway, it's most likely that some of the future videos he made, plus lifetime viewership from his older videos, were able to insulate some of the hit he took. I actually think it's more likely that if he actually tries to make any more animations now, then he would actually start dipping into his savings, which might end up hurting him. Verbalase is transphobic. Now, this one actually isn't a lie, but I'd still argue there's a degree of nuance here. Even though I'm someone who abhors bigotry, I also think one should try to explore why a bigoted person feels the way they do. I think the origins of bigotry are seldom explored, and all it does is just add more confusion to the pile. If there is a problem, it most likely has a solution. I think people are right to expose this, but I don't think the solution would be a public execution. I think sitting people down and talking to them and challenging their ideas as to why they believe what they do is important. From the comments Verbalase made, it seems to be your typical boomer belief that A, being LGBTQ is a choice, and that informs B, increased LGBTQ media might influence kids to become LGBTQ, thus betraying their true nature. From Ace's comments, he genuinely doesn't seem to understand the concept of sexual orientation or gender dysmorphia. If people could just decide to not be gay, then they wouldn't have spent decades fighting for their rights. And brave men like Harvey Milk would never have fought for these issues as hard as they did, often risking their lives and losing them in the process.
Without hope, not only gays, but those blacks and the Asians, the disabled, the seniors, the us's, without hope, the us's give up. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you, and you, and you.
This next story is purely anecdotal, but I do think it's important. Last year, I worked in an after-school care with an older black woman that had the same thoughts as Ace. She was around the same age demographic as him as well, around her 40s. She made the same exact comments as Ace, that trans women participating in sports takes away from other non-trans women. Obviously, I don't agree with this, but we have to remember that these are the thoughts of everyday people, and that the entire world isn't plugged into online discourse. By understanding why people believe what they do and why they behave the way they do, we can tackle it better and hopefully do better outreach. And if he still continues to say this stuff, Hideaway killed his channel. This is one that also might have a little bit of a grain of truth to it. It seems what hurt him more was the lack of uploads between 2020 and 2021, with only 3 big CBB videos. That seemed to hurt the series' virality and by extension its algorithmic performance. For kids, that's basically an entire year of not being in the public conversation. During that time, people can move on. So Verbalase is probably not lying here, and that YouTube genuinely is not showing his vids to his subscribers. Hideaway and spending 50k in and of itself did not ruin his channel directly, but the funds that would have otherwise gone towards the other videos seems to have done the trick. Though, would it have really done that much? CBB was losing viewership even before then and has slowly fallen out of the discussion. Even if we were to take the 50k from Hideaway into more episodes, he'd be able to afford like, what? 2 more animations? I think CBB's decline was inevitable. It just seems the Hideaway accelerated its decline by 1 more year. And of course, that's generally what happens when you have a channel dedicated to only one product. Epic Mealtime and Continue were super popular shows in the 2010s, but they generally lost their popularity over time. And again, I actually think Ace knew this on some level, which is why he was trying to diversify with Hideaway in the first place. It just didn't pan out. Of course, there's also the problem with Ace's model in the first place. All the revenue would immediately be used to fund the next video. This ties your entire channel to your main product, which is especially dangerous. That money would be better spent on building long-term channel infrastructure. Ironically, it would have been a massive boon for you to spotlight and uplift fan creators who were inspired by you instead of shutting them down. Showing off all the cool stuff your fans have made for you would have gone a long way towards community building. He made Hideaway to show to minors. This is actually not true at all, and you can see that from his statements. There's a line that Mohammedani uses in which he states that him and his friends were disgusted, which I find completely unwarranted.
We were genuinely disgusted and appalled by this video.
He asks a rhetorical question of why did he tell a server of minors that this video exists, when I think the answer is pretty obvious.
And 2, if this video is too mature to post, why would you tell a server full of minors, most of which are under the age of 15, that this video exists?
The reason he told you guys ahead of time that there was an inappropriate video out there was probably because he meant that as a warning in case you ever ran into it. That way you would know not to engage with it. Of course, what he should have done was add a disclaimer to the video itself, which, given the recklessness at which the video was conceived, is about to be expected. He also made sure to post it on a completely separate channel from his main account, with the intent that it would be far away from his regular audience. You even said yourself that the video had to be discovered, which means that it was not in his regular audience's immediate view. There's been this new pattern of behavior where minors go out of their way to find, engage, and distribute vaguely NSFW content, and then start swinging their age around like it's a fucking lightsaber. Your age isn't a weapon, and you do have agency in these situations. This reminds me a lot of the Aaron Clover debacle. An artist who had NSFW art on her Patreon had it leaked by minors who then proceeded to act all offended. If an artist goes out of their way to put NSFW content out of their audience's immediate purview and have warned them about its existence and its contents, and that if they encounter it they shouldn't watch it, then they have done their due diligence. Artists shouldn't have to anticipate underage audiences accidentally stumbling onto their content and then have to bow down to their performative anger. I will say that Saberspark's leaked DMs, as rude as they were, ended up shedding some interesting information about this video's production. The thing is, Ace seems to have been correct with his initial estimate of the video's cost, around $10K for 3 minutes of animation. But as the talks continued, it slowly climbed up to $4,700 to $4,800. So sometime during the video's production, he ended up being talked into spending 5 times as much as he initially conceived, which was double the cost of a regular episode, as well as half the length of a regular episode, which means that he was talked into spending more than he usually would have. Dude, Ace, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're being scammed. You need to reflect on who you're keeping within your immediate circle, as they might not be giving you sound financial advice. Ace doesn't seem to know a lot about animation. His background is in audio engineering, and I feel like he's being taken advantage of. If we can get someone to talk to him and educate him on the logistics of all this, he'd be better off for it. Right now, my advice to Ace is this: you need to stop and just take a breather and strategize. Right now, you're the main character of the internet, and while this is no doubtfully scary, embarrassing, and humiliating, there are other creators who have arguably done much, much worse than you. Gerard from The Completionist was literally caught engaging in a decade-long charity fraud scandal. Chugga Conroy was revealed to have been farming for feet pics under the guise of a joke. Others are bona fide child predators and sex offenders. Comparatively, you're actually much cleaner than your competition. You try to break into a new market and failed. That's literally all there is to it. But with that being said, you need to make some serious changes to the way you're running your operation ASAP. Like basic risk assessment before getting into new ventures. You are not the first, and you certainly will not be the last creator to make a complete fool out of yourself on the internet. It's true, the internet never forgets, but they do learn to give less of a shit as time goes on. I highly recommend considering the following piece of advice, as I think they could provide a good action plan for you going forward. First, you need to issue an apology with explanations about your logic. Clarifying your actions will allow you to recontrol the narrative to some degree. If you're feeling bold enough, play along with the joke. Even offer a Charlie versus Verbalase CBB and offer it as a Patreon goal. There's also the idea of taking advantage of YouTube Shorts. I could see CBB gaining a continued life through that format as well. I also highly recommend that you physically and mentally prepare yourself for the gauntlet ahead of you. This year will probably be the hardest of your entire career. I highly recommend you just follow the role model of other creators who've been in similar circumstances. Just bury yourself in your work and don't post any public statements about it outside of a formal apology and explanation of your behavior. Seriously, just keeping quiet and working on your own projects does wonders for your reputation, but it will take time. You also need to accept that your cash cow is dead and that you will never make the same amount of money that you used to. That doesn't mean that it's entirely useless. CBB is still a large platform that you can use to network, meet, and collab with other creators. There's no reason to throw away that entire infrastructure. Immediately come out and correct the misinformation that's floating around. It's better that you just nip the misinfo in the bud ASAP. Misinformation will be there forever, but a sincere apology can help mitigate some of the damage. I also think that you should set clear boundaries between yourself and your fans. Thankfully, this should have been pretty easy. You have no business making these sorts of jokes in the presence of minors, as it sets a bad precedent, and others who watch this might try to emulate this kind of behavior. You need to set a good example. I think you should reach out to those who you made those jokes to. This doesn't need to be made public, and it seems like you work things out with the offended parties from what I heard through the grapevine. Like I said, you're a classical American pervert, not a criminal. Jokes are fine and dandy, but as a big creator, you need to recognize that there's a power imbalance here. And also apologize for the transphobic statements. Again, like, no shit, why even risk that? Immediately cancel this dumb competition of outsourcing your animation to your fans. Your audience shouldn't have to pick up the slack for your fiscal recklessness. Despite my harshness, there's some bright spots here in all this. Zuriel did a great breakdown of the traditional indie animated pilot and how much it costs. Because of lifetime viewership, you'll still be able to make a small passive income through your older CBBs. A traditional CBB is 7 minutes long, and 1 minute of pro animation is usually around $2,100. You could probably continue making them for a fraction of what you used to if you cut corners, bringing them down from 7 to 3 to 5 minutes, and it would cost half about as much as the original. Take some cues from limited animation like Voltron. If you hate having to resort to this, well, tough shit, that's what happens when you make risky financial decisions. Look into hiring a PR advisor and a social media manager, as well as a financial advisor going forward. And lastly, surround yourself with people who are willing to challenge you. It's good to have a close circle of friends who are willing to call you out and challenge you on your behaviors. As of making this video, Ace has released his first public apology. I recommend checking it out for yourself. He largely confirms what I had suspected about this video's inception. You're not the first creator in this position, and you're certainly not the last. Take this as a learning opportunity. Nothing more to do other than to dust yourself off and pick yourself back up. I eagerly await your eventual improvement. Oh, and lastly, make sure you use a condom.
Can't believe in all this time I'm hurting for you, but you feel like home run. Love give it lift so high, I'm dying for it. I'm dying for it, and I can't let you go. Hide away.